All right. I think we've got some folks still coming in, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kat Buxton, and welcome to the third of 6 events for the Soil Health and Community Resilience Stories from the North series. This 2021 series is our third annual soil series. Tonight's event is called Closing Local Nutrient Loops and Building Soil, with speakers Tim Wennrich, Donna Pion, Eric Paris, and Brian Jerose. My name's Kat Buxton, as I said, and I'll be the facilitator for this evening's discussion. And I am one of the organizers for this series. First, I want to thank the other members of the organizing team, including Grace Gershuni, Becky Kulpitz, Lauren Weston, Avi Bauer, and Melissa Lorita Cole. Thank you all so much. I'd also like to thank all of you who are here this evening or watching the recording in the future. I want to thank those of you who are filling out the surveys. We really appreciate that. They are changing the way that we are designing our events. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'd also like to thank all of our incredible partners who have made this series possible. The 50+ organizations and businesses that you see on the bottom and side of your screen have helped us to fundraise for our speakers, to spread the word about these events, and shared countless resources with us that we are really excited to share with you. We'd like to give a special thank you to the Cooperative Education Fund, the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition, the Littleton Food Co-op, and to learn more about all of the partners and to take a look at all of the resources that we've gathered from partners through the pre-event planning survey, please visit our website for all of that information. You should find that link in the chat. We'd like to let you all know that we are recording tonight's event. Additionally, we are keeping you muted for now, and we ask that you keep your cameras off. Our team will be doing our best to keep disruptions to a minimum. We have a lot of wonderful content that our speakers want to share today, so the Q&A will be short. If you don't get a chance to ask a question, be sure to follow up on the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition listserv. Depending on your version of Zoom, you should also have a button at the bottom of your screen called Live Transcript. If you click on the arrow next to those words, you should be able to turn on or off an auto-generated live feed of subtitles of tonight's discussions. We apologize in advance if the transcription services captures any of the words incorrectly. The entire transcript will be saved and posted with the recording if people want to come back to hear it later and don't have access to it. If you do have any questions for us, please submit them through the Zoom chat box. We'll be monitoring that throughout the night. We'd like to open this evening with a land acknowledgement. This land acknowledgement for what is referred to some as the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont and the North Country of New Hampshire has been shared with us and others by Chief Don Stevens of the Nulhegan Band of the Cohasuk Abenaki Nation. Many of us are on the land which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples for thousands of years, and is the home of the Western Abenaki people. The team organizing this event today honors, recognizes, and respects these peoples, especially the Abenaki, as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather today. In that spirit, today we'll begin by acknowledging that we are guests on this land. We need to respect and help protect the land within our use. I'd like to take a moment of silence to honor and respect the elders of the past and the present who were and are stewards of this land. Thank you. In making this series, we wanted to create a community for all to gather safely. We created a list of community values and guidelines that are being shown on your screen right now. In this space, we agree to respect and recognize all voices, lived experiences, perspectives, and worldviews. We seek to create a safe space for learning and sharing, and we ask that we all use inclusive and respectful language. Violations of these values and guidelines will lead to removal from the event this evening by our team. Thank you for understanding. With those in mind, let's get to know each other. As you feel comfortable, please introduce yourself in the chat box. We ask that you list your name, where you are participating from tonight, and maybe respond, if you are feeling called to do so, to this burning question. Do you have one burning question about compost and or biochar? This will also help us to gather some questions for later on. So you'll have opportunities to ask questions in the chat throughout the night. I want to announce the winners from last week's raffle. We did mention that everyone who takes the survey within 1 week of watching our event live is entered into a raffle. And so last week's winner, or 2 weeks ago, the last session's winners were Nicole Murphy, Deb Yonker, Roberta McKinney, and Dakota Butterfield. Congratulations, winners. Tonight's survey, so while you're entering all of your information in the chat and introducing yourselves to each other, we do have a post-event survey that I want to tell you about. It shouldn't take more than 3 minutes to complete, and it will be sent out with the recording of tonight's event via Eventbrite. So look for that in your email. If you fill out the survey within 1 week of tonight's event, you will be entered into our raffle for prizes. The 5 prizes for tonight are a 5-gallon pail of biochar from Green State Biochar, Mighty Mini Microbe coloring books from the NRCS. They're really cool. The Rodale Book of Composting, edited by our own Grace Gershuni and Deborah Martin. A book, Organic Revolutionary by Grace Gershuni. And the 5th prize could be a compost and worm castings, a bag of compost and worm castings from Black Dirt Farm. Really good stuff. In addition, Chelsea Green Publishing has generously offered all participants of the Soil Series a 35% discount off, a discount code off of their books. There's more on their website, so check them out online. The code is PWEB3. That should be up on your screen. And it's good for all participants here tonight and watching the recording this spring. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Chelsea Green. With that, I am excited to introduce our speakers for this evening. We'll be hearing stories from Tim Wennrich of Meadowstone Farm first, and then Donna Pion of Green State Biochar, then Eric Paris of Tamerlane Farm, and then Brian Jerose of Agrilab Technologies. We're so grateful that you're all here joining us tonight. We're grateful to everyone who's made this event possible. And thank you to all of you who have hit the donate button on our website. That really makes a difference in helping us to afford to pay people to do this work. It's important work, and we hope you think so too. With that, I'm going to hand it right over to Tim to get us going on our presentation.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks, Kat, and thanks for the Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition for kind of putting this together and inviting me from Meadowstone Farm to talk about how we think about soil and how we look at soil and how we improve soil over here at our farm, although we are in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, just across the border about 20 miles from St. Johnsbury. I'm going to try to share my screen, see if this works. See here. We good? So like I said, we're over in Bethlehem, New Hampshire, just outside of the town of Littleton. So we're kind of close to a little population center. We started our farm in 2004. It was an old dairy farm, defunct dairy farm that we have been slowly reinventing and revigorating. And our some things have changed around our farm, but our lens has always been, how do we improve our soil health, and how do we become this, how do we strengthen our community through agriculture here? Currently in 2021, let's see. We're growing on about 8 acres of cultivated land. About half of that is leased. We grow a big selection of market vegetables. We have a pretty busy farm stand and CSA. Most of our products go through direct to consumer. We also have 3 heated greenhouses and 6 unheated hoop houses. 4 of those unheated hoop houses are also movable. We're really trying to push the seasons on either end of the growing season. We do, along with our farm stand, we also have pick your own flowers and a pick your own blueberry orchard to bring people to the farm. The rest of our products are wholesaled through small groceries like the Littleton Food Co-op or the Franconi Market and Deli. There's a few other stores we wholesale to, and then we have a few restaurants that we work with in the area. We grow, like I mentioned, we grow the large selection of vegetables, market vegetables. We also raise pork. We have eggs for chickens. Right now we have about 1,000 layers. We do beef, and we have our own goat creamery where we make 3 different kinds of cheeses. Since the beginning, we have always focused on food waste, and our original intent was to collect food scraps from local businesses and turn that into compost. This was back in 2004. That was kind of our original business idea. We quickly pivoted to growing vegetables because we saw that as a bigger need in the area, but we've always kept this vision of collecting food scraps, using it to improve our soil health, but also diverting it from the waste stream. And with the food scraps, you can see here, we've got the chickens going after it. And then we make compost with it in a windrow compost system. We collect about 500 gallons a week of compost from a couple different sources, and that's waxed and waned over the years. Right now, there's some renewed energy locally about food waste, and we're trying to capitalize on that to see if we can't become more of an outlet for folks. We have some drop-off sites that people are bringing it to, and then we collect from the Littleton Food Co-op and the Franconi Market and Deli. Those are the big ones that we collect from now. We also are a drop-off site. We get wood chips from all sorts of landscapers and tree folks. We get leaves, probably about, oh boy, I'm not even sure, about 100 yards of leaves every fall from local towns. And then we also get spent brewer's grain from local breweries, which goes to the chickens and then goes into our compost system. Like I mentioned, we just have a basic windrow system. We're looking at some other possibilities, but we're just moving it around with tractors. And like I said, we have always been focused on food scraps. It's been a big idea for us for making this compost, but we sell most of it at this point. We probably use maybe a quarter or so on farm. The rest we sell locally, either in bulk or in bags. And we're really, part of it is that we're transitioning into improving soils through cover crops, which is a big push all over the country in the Northeast. But really, we look to the forests of the Northeast and the fact that they're, as our inspiration, they're undisturbed forest, and they grow millions of tons of biomass every year. And the only thing that really gets added are organic matter in the form of leaves, needles, and dead and down wood. And that's kind of our goal. I mean, we're trying to cheat a little bit when we're growing tropical tomatoes in greenhouses, but really we're looking to have a minimal till system, an undisturbed system, where really all we're adding is as much organic matter as we can to the soils. And we're using different cocktails of cover crops. This I think is some oats and peas and some beans. Here we've got some summer squash and winter squash undersown with some medium red clover. This is one of our hoop houses, some radishes and some oats. This was one of our greenhouses last year, and just really you can see just the leaves that we just put in and around all of our plants. Help keeps the weeds down, but also just adding that organic matter to the soil every year. By far the hardest worker on our farm. We do have a small apiary, but just making sure that our blueberries get pollinated here. The bees are on a little bit of buckwheat. And then this is another shot of one of our tomato greenhouses. Just once the tomatoes, kind of mid-July, early August, we then go undersow a cover crop in there. As the tomato is getting taller, mostly oats and peas and beans. Looks like there's maybe some vetch in there, some chickling vetch maybe, but a lot of it is cover crops that will winter kill, so that when we go back and plant next fall, it's kind of a clean slate, but it lets the root systems, the alive root systems, just encourage the mycorrhizal fungi. And here we can see a couple fruiting heads, which we always love to see in the greenhouses. So yeah, kind of a brief overview of how we look at soils at our farm, what we're growing, how we're growing it, and then how we're distributing it to the community. And a little shot of some of the farmers say we're missing a few, but yeah. So thank you. And see if I can figure out.
Thank you so much, Tim.
Yep. All right.
Wonderful. And we're going to transition right into Donna from Green State Biochar.
Is this sheet, the screen, is the PowerPoint up there?
No.
No. Okay, let's try this one. Geez, let's try again. Is it up now?
It is.
All right.
Yeah.
There. So, let's see if I can, there, perfect. So my name is Donna Pion, and I'm the general manager of Green State Biochar. And I have over 35 years experience in accounting and business management. I worked as the controller for Sterling College for close to 15 years. Several years ago, my partners, Roger and Luke, were interested in starting a business that would utilize local organic waste materials and turn them into something viable. Their particular focus was on keeping phosphorus out of Vermont's rivers, lakes, and streams, and they discovered biochar. Biochar is simply the conversion of organic waste materials into a stable solid, high in carbon and highly porous. It has a honeycomb structure. It is this structure that allows the biochar to capture, hold, retain water and nutrients until needed by the root systems of plants, trees, and grasses. When used on contaminated soils, such as for mine reclamation, it captures and holds the toxins found in the dirt. Biochar is a hard carbon. 50 to 90% of its volume is carbon. Some materials that are used to make biochar are cow manure, nutshells, poultry litter, switchgrass. We use wood chips that we purchase by the trailer load from local wood mills and loggers in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. The process to make biochar is called pyrolysis. We bake our wood chips in an innovative working prototype kiln that we designed and built. It is a continuous flow system. Similar kilns can be purchased at costs in excess of $300,000. Ours cost $20,000 to build, labor and source materials, and mostly from junkyards. The wood chips are baked with very little oxygen and at high temperatures, close to 1300 degrees Fahrenheit. The process of converting the biomass into biochar sequesters most of the carbon in the biochar rather than releasing it into the atmosphere. We produce 300 pounds of biochar in an 8-hour day. Municipalities on the West Coast are putting biochar into filter units in drains to capture heavy metals and toxins from stormwater runoff. In Europe, it is being mixed with feed and added to poultry litter for the health and well-being of livestock. Across the globe, it is being used as a soil amendment to increase plant health, yield, shorten the times to harvest. Biochar, when added to compost, improves aeration, reduces moisture loss, thus improving the microbial activity. When this mixture is added to your soil, it conserves nutrients, acting as a sponge and releasing them when needed by the plants. Compost amended with biochar is reported to mature faster. It reaches that sweet smell and pleasant hand feel more quickly. For the past few years, we used our biochar in filters on local dairy farms to capture runoff from cleaning waters, barnyards, and the overflow from manure pits. Green State Biochar was one of the recipients of the Vermont Phosphorus Innovation Challenge. Our filters each hold between 7,000 and 8,000 pounds of biochar. We have been successful at capturing between 90 and 98% of the phosphorus running through these filters. This spring, we will be using our biochar enriched with phosphorus and as removed from the filters in field trials across the state at universities, a community garden in Holland, and a compost facility in Lyndonville. We are also providing our biochar to the Nulhegan Band of the Abenaki tribe. It is to be used in field trials with some of their programs they partner with to provide fresh produce to local food shelves. We also have some available for sale in addition to our non-inoculated biochar out of the kiln. We want to continue installing our filters on dairy farms, but without funding from the state, farmers are not able to afford them until such time we can get them into the best management practices program. Clean water is a concern everywhere. The excessive use of fertilizers, top dressing, and shallow application of soil conditioners and the ensuing runoff are all causes of the deterioration in our waterways. Agricultural practices are being blamed, as is stormwater runoff and aging sewage and septic systems. Biochar can be used as a filter material in all of these situations. When used to capture toxins from stormwater runoff, it can be put back into the kiln to remove these materials and then get used again. We like to say the earth is our customer, but quickly found out that doesn't fare well with banks. I do see this changing though, as the market for carbon credits is quickly coming into its own. A ton of biochar is now worth a $200 credit. As a highly stable carbon, it can be sequestered for hundreds of years, thus reducing greenhouse gas emissions and maybe someday reverse climate change. A study at Cornell estimates that the conversion of residues from commercial forestry and crop production to biochar could offset as much as a third of US carbon emissions from fossil fuels. Consumers, gardeners, landscapers, tree farmers, horticulturists, all will be using biochar soon. Our mission is to utilize local waste wood, produce high quality biochar, and create a viable, sustainable company that offers good paying jobs and grows the economy in this rural part of Vermont while reducing our carbon footprint. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Donna.
Thank you.
Fascinating. We've got a lot of questions coming in about biochar.
Oh boy.
And we're going to transition over to Eric Paris of Tamerlane Farm.
Okay. Thank you, Kat. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. I run a certified organic dairy, beef, and operation in Lyndonville, Vermont. We do a few vegetables, and of course, we also have a commercial composting operation located on our farm. My parents purchased the farm in 1956. I've worked there full-time since 1979. In 1983, I married Kathy, and we raised our two children, Bonnie, who is now 35, and Ben, who's 32, on the farm. So through the years, we made a lot of changes. Kathy and I took over management of the farm in 1988, and we took over ownership of the farm in 1993. And we were conventional dairy for many years. And then in the early years of 2000, 2001, 2002, I just didn't like the way conventional farming was going. It just started seeming like I had to, seemed to be going in the way that we had to use synthetic hormones, or were told we had to use synthetic hormones, and, grain our cows, and antibiotics, and, some fungicides and pesticides and insecticides, and I just didn't like the way the whole thing was going. So the more I looked into certified organic farming, the more I realized that certified organic farming really paralleled the philosophies that I had about farming. So we transitioned to certified organic farming. We started our transition in 2003, and in 2004 we shipped our first tank of certified organic milk. So not long after we decided to be certified organic in our dairy operation, we began a certified organic beef operation as well. And during the fall of 2003 and 2004, we renovated the 1866 freight house in downtown Lyndonville into what our family owns and operates today, known as the Freight House Market and Cafe. In 2019, we also added a second restaurant, the Mosaic Restaurant. And all of the beef found on the menus at both places, as well as some of the vegetables, actually come off our farm. So it's kind of a cool food loop, because we raise the beef and the vegetables on the farm. It's for sale and also is on the menu at the restaurants. Of course, we separate the food scraps, which go back to the farm, back into the composting stream. Some of the compost gets spread on our fields and pastures, which of course is used to raise more beef and grow hay for the beef, and also to raise more vegetables, which come back to the restaurant. So it's kind of this cool little food cycle that we have. So this is mainly about composting, so I'm going to try to stick to mostly about the composting operation on our farm. So as I said, in 2003, 2004, we renovated the freight house into the Freight House Market and Cafe. To back up a little bit, after we transitioned to certified organic farming, one of my concerns was how I was going to meet the fertility needs of our pastures and our fields. And the more I looked into this, the more I realized that compost seemed to be the way to go. So I was thinking about how I would start composting, and then kind of light came on one afternoon in May of 2004. I was carrying a bag of trash to the dumpster from the Freight House Market and Cafe. And I was carrying it thinking, boy, you know, this bag is heavy. What's making this bag so heavy? Then I realized there were food scraps in that bag of trash. And I'm like, wait, this is not right. We're throwing away nutrients here. So kind of the light kind of came on, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to start composting using some of the food scraps that we were producing, as well as our own dairy manure. So during the summer of 2004, I was taking food scraps from the restaurant home, dumping it into our manure spreader, and then, you know, taking the manure that was produced daily from the farm. And I made a crude windrow on the site where actually our compost operation is today. I rolled it with a tractor, and somehow, by the grace of God, it became compost. So, and it was good stuff. So one thing led to another. I partnered with the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District and the Highfields Institute, which was in Hardwick, Vermont at the time. And in 2005, we put down a gravel pad, and we began accepting food scraps from originally 6 food scrap generators. And we were using our own dairy manure and some wood chip and some horse manure. And so we began our composting operation in 2005. Through the years, it has grown. Originally, we were accepting 2 or 3 tons of food scraps a week, and I thought that was a large amount. I think it was 2014 or 15, we got a working lands grant where we expanded the footprint of our composting operation, and we redid the receiving bay. And at the time, we were just making windrows that we were turning with the tractor. And but what happened eventually is, even though we had expanded our composting pad, we were running out of room, because as we began accepting more and more food scraps, we realized that we were not able to turn finished compost over in time in the way that we wanted to produce it. We just didn't feel like we had the time to really finish the compost. Most of the compost is spread on our own farm anyway, but we do market some. So starting about 6 years ago, actually, I started working with Jerose from Agrilab on the concept of creating an ASP, an aerated static pile. And so for a few years, we were in the planning process and searching out funding. So finally, last year, the entire concept came to fruition. And last fall, we installed our aerated static pile system, which has a heat recovery unit. We're capturing the heat from the compost, and this ASP has actually exceeded my expectations. We're able to turn off finished compost far faster now than we were able to before, and it's just working remarkably well. We ran out of time this fall because the winter closed in, but we did get our underground piping installed. So then in the spring, we'll be able to build a shop on site, and we'll be able to heat the shop with radiant heat captured from the composting operation. And Brian, in a little bit, will talk more about the nuts and bolts, so to speak, of the composting operation and the ASP. But I just wanted to share with you a couple of things that I'm really interested in. And I'm very interested in, and I don't pretend to know a lot about it, but I'm very interested in the biological activity and things that are going on beneath the soil in terms of things like the bacteria mycorrhiza and the fungi mycelium, which I think is, I really think this is cool stuff, and I've been learning all that I can about it. A couple cool things about mycelium that most of you probably know, but I find fascinating, is that 1 cubic inch of mycelium contains like 8 miles of its thread. It's the mother of all humus, and it is the largest organism in the world. And I think that's pretty cool stuff. But my belief that there's growing data leading to the realization that we need to focus as much or more on the biological cycles and activities in the soil as we do for soil fertility. A side note to this is the fact that too much phosphorus can bind mycorrhiza. In my opinion, compost is a universal soil amendment, as it already contains most of the biological activity that the soil needs, and it's an excellent soil inoculant as well. So I'm thinking that perhaps soil tests don't always give us an actual pulse reading of the soil, as has long been protocol. And by the way, if more of you folks would like to learn more about some of the biological activity that's going on in soil, I came upon a really cool thing on YouTube by Paul Stamets. It's called 6 Ways Mushrooms Can Save the World. And believe me, folks, it's worth watching. So that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. Lots to say there. And Brian, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for those attending, learning more about these healthy soils. To add to what Eric said, I'm going to run through several slides from the construction work last year. And we'll also be able to give a description of the site, if I can get the slides to advance. I believe my screen is sharing.
Yep, your screen is up.
All right, I found a workaround. All right,
All
so
right.
this is some of what Eric already described. But again, he became a state certified facility in order to be able to accept the food scraps and mix it in with his existing on-farm materials, largely the manures, as well as wood chips. Also credit the Highfields and then James McSweeney of Compost Technical Services for a small pilot system and other planning to help improve the site. And then finally, we're able to work with Eric and several funders through Slow Money and the Clean Energy Development Fund and the Agency of Ag to pull together the capital to install these improvements. So we have different stages of composting. As Eric mentioned previously, he's exclusively been flipping and turning the material with a tractor and now has a payloader. But the premise behind the aeration system is we're able to either pull or push air and its oxygen into those batches and accelerate the process. Fun fact is, in a big hot compost pile, after turning it with a loader or a tractor, an active pile and all that biology and bacteria at the initial stages can use up all the oxygen in the core in as little as an hour. And then the process will slow down until the pile is turned again. So on a busy farm, when you're not able to turn every day or even every week sometimes, having an aeration system that can push or pull oxygen into that pile multiple times a day on a timer cycle can really speed things up. We're fortunate to work with a lot of different great partners locally. Jane Construction, Goodwin Electric, Padwin Construction, Harrison Plumbing and Heating, and Tamerlane Farm staff was closely involved as well. So I'll go quickly through these slides, but it's always helpful to say, all right, what does this actually look like? So the compost was pushed to the side and a clear working pad, and it was leveled or pitched to the one direction and flattened. And this is our equipment. This is our compost aeration and heat recovery unit. So those 4 pipes coming out of the side, we're able to, again, pull and push air and the vapor from pipes that go under the compost piles and then into the heat exchanger and a blower that provides that suction. Those different valves on there are able to be controlled with a timer that we're able to punch in the settings on site or able to work remotely from Franklin County or Cambridge and work with Eric. So we got to bring up that equipment to the site and Eric built a deck to put it on, and then that shed gets enclosed. Jason on our team is up there mounting a flow sensor so we can see how fast that air and vapor is moving. And getting a great view, by the way. You'll see this is one of the most scenic compost sites I've gotten to work with, Burke Mountain and in the direction. So there's Eric's moving some of these big, heavy HDPE plastic pipes. Earlier projects, we would use PVC pipes. These high density polyethylene are much more durable and less prone to shattering and breaking. So we're able to get these into place, lay them out, and then that machine that Jason's working with is called a fusion welder. Some of these same pipes are used in utilities or even gas lines. Ours is a much lower pressure application, but you can fuse these together with a specialized heating fusion welder. As Eric mentioned, we did put in some of the plumbing connections. So beyond trying to be an efficient composting system, all that hot vapor that gets pulled in from the piles as much as 150 degrees heats up a water and glycol loop through a specialized heat exchanger. Eric's holding on to we'll call it a Badger pipe, but basically it's a corrugated pipe that has insulated lines of PEX plumbing pipe, and that's going to allow us to circulate that heated hot water, kind of similar to a solar thermal system or a geothermal system, be able to circulate that up to the new garage and greenhouse. Yeah, here's a view of where the greenhouse will sit, and that's the dairy barn across the pasture in the background. So it's a 1/10 of a mile down the road from where the cows are, and right across from the Caledonia County Airport is across the road. A few things that you can't see now that the system is built, but minor details, like if you insulate the lines, we're going to keep that temperature of the hot vapor is close to the temperature in the pile by the time it gets to the heat exchanger. So we're conserving energy, and that allows us to get hotter water and glycol to use when we're able to circulate it to a heating load. Working with, again, those Padwin construction and Jane construction, 2 of the 4 bays were improved with concrete. We only did 2 to minimize the costs, but that also gives us a chance to have in all seasons of the year, whether it's muddy, transition spring, Eric can get on these zones and load and unload material. Another pic of block walls lining parts of the pad and those insulated pipes going up to it. Once the concrete is set, we put the aeration pipes for 2 of the zones down in a trench. And then before loading the mixed compost, we'll put the wood chips either over the pipes that sit on grade in the upper parts, the zones 3 and 4 on the working pad. There's a nice sunset picture of Eric with a mixed load of food scraps, wood chips, and manure loading on top of those pipes. And then in the concrete zones 1 and 2, you can see wood chips are laid down into that trench around the pipes. That helps prevent those pipes from getting clogged with the wet particles of manure and food scraps, and helps distribute the air under the center of the pile. And there's a view of the system as it started to get loaded in December. And another view of one of the concrete bays with the aeration trench underneath. So you can picture the blower back in that shed, that equipment. It's basically putting a big suction or pull, also known as negative aeration, on that compost pile, and it draws the oxygen out of the air and pulls that hot vapor into the exchange unit. We can also, this is one of the control screens. In addition to pulling, we can also push. So one of the ways that we've been able to extend the winter operation instead of going into dormant or hibernation mode is we can recirculate. If we have You do need a hot batch, but if we've got a hot batch in one pile, you could push the exhaust once it gets up to adequate oxygen levels, 10% or more. You can push that hot vapor into a new cold mixture. So instead of it taking a week to warm up to those 131 degrees Fahrenheit or greater, we can do that process down to a day or two when things are going well. So this is what we track, and Eric and I sometimes talk on the phone looking at the screen and talk about how to change the timer settings and what we can do next. Couple recent shots just to close with. Again, as Eric described, it's got food scraps coming in from different sources. Black Dirt Farm, I believe, delivered this load. They've got a customized sealed trailer that brings in the food scraps. It's tipped onto a concrete pad mixed with the chips and the manure, and then, as described, gets loaded onto those aeration zones. And Eric sent this picture this week of clearing out parts of the batches. You can kind of make out the wood chips give a guide for how low the bucket operates, and you can start to see parts of the pipe tucked in there. But again, the wood chips at the bottom center of the pile help distribute the air and make sure all portions of that windrow and mixture of feedstocks gets well aerated. So hopefully that gives you a sense of how we're doing it, and happy to move into the next part of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you all so much. And I am just so inspired by everything. It's settling in. We're gonna hand it over to Q&A, and while we get organized for that, I do have one question. It sounds like Donna and Eric, maybe you're going to be doing some work together with biochar, mixing Donna's biochar into Eric's compost and Brian's technology.
Yes, that's the plan, and do some field trials, and it'll be both biochar that's not inoculated and biochar that's being pulled from the filters. So they'll be side by side, and I believe Heather Darby from UVM is going to be able to record data from those field trials, which will be good. So yeah, that's the plan. We have about, at least 10,000 pounds, maybe a little more of the biochar that we've pulled from the filters. So that's phosphorus enriched, and then we just have straight biochar out of the kiln. So, and we're doing the same with a few other groups, so we can really have some good field trials this year.
That's really exciting. How can we stay tuned to that research, or should we just be patient and wait?
Well, you have to go through a growing season, so
yeah. So maybe some patience.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to wait.
All right.
Hopefully we'll get a few trials in relatively small plots, but with different settings. Eric's in a situation different than many farms where he actually needs some phosphorus for the size of his herd and his land base. So he's in a good position to bring in some of these materials and see what the crop response is, and particularly if there's even extended benefits by blending the biochar and the compost.
All right, great. Thank you guys. We're going to go to audience questions now, and I would like to ask people to, you can go ahead and turn on your cameras. Let's have a conversation and see each other. If you're comfortable, please turn your cameras on. And we're going to go ahead and ask you some questions, and I might ask you to unmute yourself. So Carl, I'm going to apologize for not saying names properly. Please forgive me. Carl Buckelt from Manchester, you had a question about compost ratios. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Kat, they can't unmute themselves.
Oh. So we have to ask them to unmute?
Correct. I'm also not seeing Carl's name anymore.
I'm not either. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Carl's question. He was wondering about ratio recommendations. It sounds like some folks recommend a 10-to-1 ratio of brown to green for compost, while many others recommend 3-to-1. Does that have to do with curing time, fungal microbiology, or firing temperatures? Any of you who would like to address that question? Love to hear from you. Brian.
I can take a shot. There's different ways to look at that. There's a by volume, 3-to-1 is a great starting point. By weight, it's actually a dry weight is that 30-to-1, like the carbon to nitrogen. So typically leaves, wood chips, bedding, straw, things of that nature are going to be more fibrous and more rich in carbon. So if you tend to have a more carbon-rich feedstock, you may end up with a more fungal-rich compost at the end. Typically in a more mature compost that takes longer to make, there's more opportunity for those beneficial fungal organisms to form. Certain crops like strawberries, I believe, actually like a more bacterial dominated compost. So something that isn't composted for as long, and maybe something that doesn't have as much wood has more fresh greens that'll degrade faster. The other big differences in the carbon are their particle size. Small, tiny particles like sawdust are going to break down a lot faster than wood chips, and also the form of lignin. So woody materials and certain stems like hemp or straw are going to have more lignin, whereas leaves and some other forms of carbon are going to be less resistant and break down faster with whatever your source of nitrogen is.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, so it sounds like it's pretty contextual based on materials and what your end goal is.
I hope that at least partially answered your question.
Yeah, I think that was good. Thank you so much. Okay, next question is Amanda from Gilman, Vermont. We are going to try and unmute folks because I always like to hear people's voices, and I think it's just much nicer if we can hear from individuals. I'm seeing that hasn't happened yet, so I'm going to go ahead and ask this question for Amanda from Gilman, Vermont. Oh, did I hear somebody's voice? Amanda,
I'm here. Okay, so forgive the ignorance, but I'm really just curious if I'm starting with organic matter that isn't organic, if it's just produce bought at the store and it's cheap and it's probably full of pesticides and all sorts of things. Am I ruining the soil by composting that? Am I making things worse or better? Or I don't know. Help.
So what is it that what is it that you're using in your compost?
So banana peels and oranges and things like that that are bought at just a regular grocery store that aren't grown organically, and I'm composting them. Am I creating a nutrient deficient compost pile essentially and then spreading that out? Am I creating a larger problem, or am I doing something that's better than doing nothing?
By volume, how large is your compost pile?
Oh, it's small, maybe 2 yards.
Well, Brian, I think you're in a better position to answer that than I am, because you know a lot more about the chemical makeup of compost. So I'll hand it to you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer it quickly. The composting process has been shown to actually break down the vast majority of herbicides, pesticides. It can't break down completely synthetic materials. So particularly looking at organic agriculture, there's a lot of prohibited inputs. But in the case of like food scraps from the store, only a small fraction of those materials are going to be certified organic. So the understanding is that that original banana peel or apple core is turned into 10 different things by the time it gets eaten by the different bacteria, which are eaten by other parts of the microbial ecosystem, or the ecosystem of a compost pile. So based on that, if you follow enough time and temperature, it may not be so much true in your backyard pile. You may need to wait for a longer time period, but at least for having it approved for organic use, if it's composted for 15 days above 131 degrees and turned 5 times, or in an aerated system over that temperature for 3 days or more, it's been shown where almost all of those materials are going to be broken down and not identifiable or detectable at the end of the process. The big exception to that is a category of persistent herbicides, clopyralid being one of them, that's like used in grass. And that was like a big concern with Green Mountain Compost and other facilities around the country a few years ago. So trying to avoid sprayed grass clippings, which really aren't allowed in Vermont, or in some cases horse feed to horses from irrigated plots out west can contain that clopyralid. But in your case, you are doing nothing wrong by putting that banana peel in your compost pile and ultimately returning it to your garden.
Okay.
But break it down. If it still looks like a banana peel, put it back in the compost pile. When it's finally broken down and it's crumbly and soil-like, it's ready for your garden.
Awesome. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Next question is coming in from Donna O'Malley. Donna, speak up if you can hear us and are unmuted to ask your question. Wonderful.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, again, just small family garden. Questions around compost and the materials that go in them. And so I was just wondering, do the leaves need to be broken down before added either to the garden or to the compost pile? I've always mowed them, and it would be nice to know if they didn't have to be broken down. So I think that was the main compost question. Yeah, and then I had another one about cover crops for, again, a small farm where we're trying to avoid doing a lot of, well, no more tilling, knowing that that's not good, but what cover crops are we able to just break down by digging them in most easily?
Great. That sounds like it might be a good question for Tim.
Yeah, can you hear me okay? The first question, those are great questions. And just, I'll actually go back to the previous question. I feel, I can't remember who asked it, but maybe it was Donna, but I feel your pain, those kind of discussion, thoughts about what am I putting into my compost. I mean, we have those, it always angsts me, putting banana peels in and knowing where they're coming from. And but Brian answered it great. Going back to leaves, it for us, it really comes down to it always, I mean, farmers, I mean, it's either you're either spending time or money, and farmers have neither. Is the way I look at it. And so it depends on what we're using. Mostly we don't do anything to our leaves. Yeah, it would be great if we got them pre-shredded. But the towns and some customers bring them shredded, but really shredded leaves do, if I had a choice, I would use shredded leaves all the time. They're easier to handle. There's less volume. They break down quicker. They're just nicer to work with. But we just don't have the capacity to shred them once we get them, except for we use leaves to mulch our garlic. And I do rent a shredder for that. And it works great. And we shred them, and then we use that on our to mulch our garlic with. Otherwise the leaves just become too matted, and the garlic has trouble kind of making its way through it in the spring. So, and then the other question with cover crops, I mean, cover crops, it all depends a lot on what you're trying to accomplish. Are you trying to smother weeds? Are you trying to add organic matter? Are you trying to add nutrients? Or are you trying to do all of it all the time? And really it comes down, for us, it comes down to what cover crops what cover crop cocktails can we put together? So we always try to put in something that's going to fix some nitrogen. We use a lot of field peas. We use a lot of beans. And then what's going to provide a lot of organic matter for that, we use a lot of oats. And we always, for us, we're trying to think of something that's going to winter kill. There are a lot of cover crops that will survive the winter, not a lot, but like winter rye and vetch, hairy vetch for one. But for us and our soils tend to be very wet and cold in the spring, and they don't dry out. And so the cover crops that overwinter actually can get away from us too much in the spring. But how we deal with the cover crops and not tilling is we get them to the size where they kind of have met their maximum efficiency before they go to seed. And we have what's called a crimper, which kind of pushes the cover crops down. It's something that we use on our tractor for bigger sections, but we also have a couple smaller ones that we've kind of made that push. And we've even used, I mean, sometimes in a pinch, we'll use a weed whacker or a mower. But then we tarp that garden with a silage tarp, which doesn't let light through. It kind of smothers whatever's there, and it kills the cover crop completely. It doesn't have to be a silage tarp. Those are just kind of readily available for us. Dairy farmers use them. They're kind of the big white tarps you see covering farm silage. They're usually black on one side, or you can get black on both sides, and you can cut it. We have at this point we have different size silage tarps for different gardens or greenhouses, and that's what we use to kind of smother the cover crop and kill it. And then before we plant, we'll pull it up, and whatever debris is there, we'll kind of rake into the pass. And usually, in ideal world, we're left like with a nice planting surface to put transplants in, or to direct seed, and it kind of gives us a little bit of head start on whatever weed seeds may still be in there surviving.
Thank you, Tim. I hope that was helpful, Donna.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Great. I'd like to transition into a question about biochar, and I'm going to ask this one because I'm combining a few questions. We got a lot of questions in about biochar. There are a lot of people are curious about biochar, including myself. Want to hear a little bit about the methods of inoculating biochar with microbes and rock dust. Donna, you did mention inoculated biochar. Can you talk a little bit more about how you inoculate and what results you're seeing with that, and have you done anything with rock dust as well as compost in inoculation?
We have not, but Tom Vanacourt does have inoculated biochar with rock dust. That's his company is called Rock Dust Local, and we have used some of his inoculated biochar with the rock dust just to do some small field trials, and we think it's great. But we're not inoculating our own biochar with rock dust. Our inoculated biochar is simply that of coming out of the filters from the organic dairy farms where the filters were installed. So we let the dairy farms inoculate the biochar. And there are many ways to inoculate biochar. I mean, you can use poultry litter, you can use compost, anything that's going to break down into a nutrient, the biochar is going to absorb and hold. That's the beauty of the biochar. It's a hard carbon. It's very porous. It holds on to those nutrients until the plants need refreshment, and then takes it. So it doesn't dissipate in the ground. There are some people that urinate on their biochar, and that's a method of inoculation. You could take any organic liquid fertilizer and put it on your biochar. That would be inoculating it. So there's many methods to inoculate the biochar. I prefer to sell it not inoculated and let people use what they have. If it's compost, if it's poultry litter, if it's worm casings, if it's rock dust, it's almost like let people be their own soil scientists. And what are you growing? You know, so different plants need different nutrients, so that it's really kind of broad. I would prefer not to sell inoculated biochar. I'd prefer to have the consumer inoculate their own, or when pulled from the filters, I've got another product that can be used. But rock dust local is a good source for biochar inoculated with rock dust.
Thanks so much, and thanks to our team for finding that link and throwing it in the chat, into the chat for rock dust local. Another question about biochar and quantities. Is there too much biochar in a garden? And I think we have a lot of gardeners here, maybe some farmers as well. So if we were to think about not pounds per acre, but yogurt cups per garden or something like that.
I say, and again, it depends on your soil. We talking soil, or are we talking dirt? Are you talking, you know, something that's already rich soil or poor soil or clay soil or sandy soil? But I say that a 5-gallon pail will cover 400 square feet. And that's assuming you have a decent soil, a relatively decent soil.
And is that something you would recommend replacing at some frequency, or this is a long-term new addition to your soil?
It's a long-term new addition. It's not going to break down, so you don't have to fertilize as often. If you don't have biochar in your soil, it's safe to say that when you do put fertilizer there, that the ground takes a lot of it. If there are no plants there, if there are plants there, they take what they need, but you know, excess watering dissipates that fertilizer. So that's the beauty of the biochar, is that it holds on to it, and you get the bigger bang for your buck when you are fertilizing.
Great, thank you. And I have another question about biochar from Tatiana Schreiber. Tatiana, if you're on, would you like to ask your question?
Okay. I'm trying to undo my video there. Yeah, one question I have is when you use the biochar as filters, like you described, which was very interesting, you were filtering cow manure primarily in dairy farms. But if it's used as a filter like that, and one of the goals is to capture potential like microcontaminants that might be in the manure, then when you go to use that as a soil amendment, wouldn't some of those contaminants potentially be released? I'm not understanding this theory, because you're saying that the nutrients are released, but not the other potential toxins.
If there are contaminants in the manure off the organic dairy farm, yes, it's very possible that if a plant is requesting nutrition and it's pulling from what the biochar is holding and there's contaminants in that, yes, you're right. You know, we test our biochar when it comes out of the filters, but you know, we have 8,000 pounds of it, and you can do a random sampling to see what's in there. And it's pretty extensive, those tests, what they're testing it for. And thus far, nothing has come up that's a contaminant. If you're using biochar for like mine reclamation, yes, you wouldn't reuse that. You could throw that biochar back in the kiln, and it will kill some of it. It won't kill all of it. Asbestos does not die. So you don't want to use that kind of biochar in your ground as a soil conditioner. The only thing you can do with that kind of biochar is throw it back in the kiln to feed the kiln to produce energy. But no, you wouldn't want to put that in the ground. And when we do pull it out of the filters, it does go through extensive testing to make sure we're not putting contaminants in.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Good question, Tatiana. I see a question in the chat that came from Lauren Weston that I'm really curious about too, and I want to ask about it. We all know that we have water quality issues in Vermont, and in Lake Champlain we have a serious phosphorus overload, but in the Connecticut River Valley we have nitrogen issues. We have too much nitrogen in the water, and y'all are in the Connecticut River Valley, and I wonder, I'd love to hear from our speakers how you think your work is influencing the nitrogen cycle, hopefully in a positive way in our region.
I can speak a
Great.
little bit to that. It's always a concern for us. I mean, we are in the Inoculating River Valley, and we're less than about a half a mile from the Inoculating River, and we've got a couple streams that border our property. So it is always on our mind. I mean, part of how we mitigate it is that we always have our buffer zones to these bodies of water, to these streams from our fields, anywhere from 20 to 50 yards of grass and kind of natural habitat, alders and vegetation. And as far as how we deal with our manure and our compost, one of them is, I mean, we have a specific manure pit, concrete manure pit to collect everything. But also with our compost, we don't have a specific site that is always our compost site. For our windrows, we tend to move it every year, which is a little bit of work, but it also kind of doesn't impact one location with that compost. And we tend to, because we have a lot of wood chips, we tend to set the compost on a bed of wood chips to help if there is any excess nitrogen from the compost, from the manure. Hopefully it's getting captured by that organic matter in the wood chips and not getting put into the hydrologic system. And I think with our fields, it is all about having organic matter to capture any excess nitrogen, whether that organic matter is roots from cover crops or stems from cover crops on the surface, or even crop debris or leaves. Just kind of having organic matter available in the soil or on the soil to capture, to help capture any available nitrogen, so that it doesn't get put into either the atmosphere or in the water, because nitrogen is incredibly volatile but necessary nutrient. So
Wonderful. Donna or Eric, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, I can just add that, I do have a dairy farm, certified organic dairy farm, and our manure system is a solid manure system. We don't have liquid manure, but I prefer to use our manure in the compost and then spread it. We have a couple of streams on the farm, and we have some rented land that have streams, and those streams eventually run into the Connecticut River. But in terms of spreading manure versus compost, I think compost is the better alternative because it lessens the likelihood of runoff. And I think Brian might want to talk a little bit about actually the phosphorus issue, because I know Brian's been working on some phosphorus projects. Brian, do you have anything to add with that?
Just, I'll try to add to what you and Tim said, as well as the phosphorus, but just for folks who aren't aware, nitrogen and phosphorus behave quite differently. Phosphorus is a little more sticky in the sense that it adheres to the sides of soil particles and is mostly lost through erosion or when manure physically runs off of a field and into a waterway. Whereas what Tim was describing, it's nitrogen is much more volatile. So whether it can go off, if you smell liquid manure after it's spread, that's largely ammonia, nitrogen being lost to the air. But it also can be lost. What we can't see is down through the soil profile. So to loop back and try to answer the original question, really what our work and our company is doing is trying to make better compost more efficiently and rapidly. And then that compost is used to add to the soils, which builds up the soil carbon or soil organic matter level, which has the big impact of retaining more moisture and increasing the cation exchange capacity. So when manure or any other type of fertilizer is applied, it's going to be less prone to rapidly running through the soil profile and being held in the soil zone and ultimately taken up and utilized by the plants, rather than getting into those shallow groundwater layers and then into the streams and the river. So that's part of the system that I see. And then the phosphorus is, again, very different. It's really more focused on erosion control practices and not and really watching soil phosphorus levels in fields where it accumulates or where it's actually needed by crops.
Thank you very much. I saw a new question come in from Chris Heb. Chris, do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Yeah. My question is, what's the difference between hardwood and softwood when it comes both to mulching a veggie garden and for making, this is chips, compost? Is there a preferred type of wood?
Anybody who wants to take that, go for it.
I'll give it a shot. It's going to come down to a few factors. In terms of composting, some of the softwoods, because of their oils, can be a little more resistant to decay. So cedars, pine, hemlocks, things of that nature, they're going to do great for making the aeration, the porosity, like avoiding the pile from collapsing on itself. But you don't expect them to break down as quick or as rapidly as a hardwood material. So hardwoods may break down a little bit faster. And then in terms of just using it straight as a mulch, whether it was compost, perhaps even not composted, probably more of the issue around that is the pH. So softwoods may be a little more acidic and may be more appropriate for blueberries or certain crops that like a little more acid. And then the hardwoods, I believe, and this may not be true across the board, but I believe are closer to neutral and could be probably a better wood mulch for other crops.
Thank you. Very good.
Welcome.
Okay, Becky Colpitz, would you like to unmute and ask your questions?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, I can't start my video, but I can unmute. And I forget my question now.
You had a question for Tim about drop-off sites.
Oh yeah, I was wondering, Tim, if you have food scrap drop-off sites that anyone can drop off food scraps to, and if so, where are they located? Thanks for reminding me, Kat.
Yeah, so right now we have our drop-off site at the farm, which anyone can drop off to. We're kind of in discussions with folks at the Littleton transfer station and the Bethlehem transfer committee about establishing some other ones that are going to be more available to folks. But right now, the best is right at the farm, right by our farm stand. Drop off everything you got, and we'll take anything but raw meat or liquids.
Is that like known throughout our community? Do you know?
We're slowly putting it out there. We're putting it out in Bethlehem for right now first, and we're kind of putting it out more by word of mouth and through our kind of farm email group. And obviously we're putting it out there tonight. We haven't really publicized it tremendously until we're not quite sure how much volume. We don't want to end up with too much volume that we can't deal with too soon. So we're kind of trying to slowly grow it.
Thank you,
So,
Tim.
yeah, don't put it on the Littleton Co-op website quite yet.
Okay.
Give us a month.
I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions. I'd like to call on Charlie Costello and then Rob Kurth. So Charlie, if you want to unmute and ask your questions.
Again, my questions were way at the beginning, and one of it was just about how do you make biochar. I don't know the exact question on the other one, but I'm in Berkeley, California, so I have a small little farm with a community seed bank, and so I do mostly cover crops, but biochar is really interesting, so I'm just kind of interested in a home gardener making biochar. Is that possible?
Yes, it's possible. And there are plenty of videos on YouTube for someone that wants to, dig a hole in the ground, put in the wood chips, cover it with leaves, suffocate it, and make biochar that way. Yes, there are ways that small farmers can make, or just do-it-yourselfers that want to make small quantities of biochar. There's actually a person by the name of Kelpie Wilson who makes a unit. It's $1,000. It's called the Ring of Fire, and that's a nice unit for someone that really wants to go at it a little bit more and maybe do biochar for a few block radius of their home, or has an acre garden, or wants some but not doesn't want to resell it. So I'd look at Kelpie Wilson's Ring of Fire, or look at YouTube, and you can also do it in 55-gallon drums. There's many ways you can make biochar. And of course, the more sophisticated machines are in the millions. So you can go from anything from digging a hole in your backyard to $5-8 million for a big unit. But yeah, you can do it.
Thanks, Donna. And I think you might have answered a few questions that were in the chat with that one, but Rob's might still be a little different. So Rob, do you want to unmute yourself? Rob Kurth. Not sure if Rob is still on, so I'll go ahead and ask his question. I've seen people use lump hardwood charcoal, for example, Cowboy brand, which are claimed to be natural with no additives. Could I crush this and use it in the garden after charging? I think that's for you, Donna.
Charcoal, when you put water to charcoal, if you take lump charcoal and crush it, and it's going to dissolve. And that's the difference between a charcoal and a biochar. A biochar is hard carbon, it's not going to dissolve. So yes, you can use it, but it's not doing the same thing that a hard carbon is doing. A lot of people take their, and again, it depends what you're planting, what you want to use it for. Lilacs, like wood ash from, wood stoves. Depends what you're using it for. It's not the same. It dissolves in water, and biochar doesn't.
Great. Thank you, Donna. And I want to encourage everybody to also look at the chat. There are some really great answers to questions coming from audience members as well. So check those out. And we still have a little more time. I'd like to direct a question to Eric. Our last question of the night before we do our closing. Can you just talk about the process of what's it like to get registered? The chat went away, so I can't see it anymore, but like with the Agency of Natural Resources, what was your permitting process like, and where might someone go to get started in that process?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kat. So yeah, you begin the process by contacting the Agency of Natural Resources. It's really not as painstaking as a lot of people think it might be. We have a categorical certification that we have to renew each year, but it's really super simple. I get an online form that just asks approximately how much of each ingredient in our compost that we're using. I failed to mention earlier that we use wood chip, cow manure from our own dairy, horse manure, and of course food waste. And we do compost about 12 tons of food waste a week. So one would start by contacting the Agency of Natural Resources, and they'll come out. And there is some criteria that has to be met. You have to have the correct soils to make sure that leachate, if it does run off your pad, will not make it to a waterway. Obviously, your composting operation has to be X amount away from water sources of any kind, someone's well, a stream, a river. And again, the soil has to be correct so that it doesn't, any runoff wouldn't make it to that waterway. You have to be X amount of feet away from a road. You can compost, but my composting facility is right beside Pudding Hill Road, but I can't make active compost within, I think, 100 feet of the travel lane. So there are certain criteria that have to be met, but they're not that restrictive. So one does have to start by contacting the Agency of Natural Resources. And again, it's not a painstaking process. It's really, I think it's a lot smoother and easier than some folks have been led to believe.
Thanks so much for that. We need more
You're
people
welcome.
out there composting, doing all the great work you guys are doing. Thank you all so much for a wonderful chat, and to everyone for joining and for all of the questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all of the questions, and we want to keep the conversation going. So we're using our listserv at Vermont Healthy Soils Coalition to keep the conversation going. So please go ahead and join our listserv. You can elect to join the listserv when you fill out the post-event survey. Please fill that out, and it will be sent along with the recording by email from Lauren. Make sure to fill out the survey this week in order to enter the raffle and win some of those great prizes. 2 weeks from tonight, we will be back with the 4th event of the Soil Series on March 24th at 6:30 p.m. It's called Healing the Land with Farm Animals. And our featured presenters will be Bill Fozier from the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Districts, Diantha Jones from the Jones Farm in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, and Rebecca Beidler and Jeffrey Ellis of Piece of Earth Farm in Albany, Vermont. So tune in on the 24th. It's going to be great. Again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight and making this a great series.
Thank you.
You bet. Brian, Donna, Tim,
Thank you.
Eric.
Thank you,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you.
Great discussion.